Okay, so today we're diving right into a really, really pressing issue,
Mm.
the situation in Manipur. And, reading the Indian Express, one thing that jumped out immediately was just how quickly how the Lok Sabha, handled the whole president's rule thing during the budget session, like
Yeah.
ratified in under an hour.
Yeah, under an hour. I mean, it makes you think, right? Like, okay, it's constitutionally allowed, sure. But was it really was it a well thought out decision based on lots of discussion? Or was it, maybe like the article kind of hints at, just like a quick way to deal with a situation they didn't fully grasp? And it wasn't even a surprise. Right.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. This wasn't something that just came out of nowhere. Like back in March, the article mentions Outer Manipur's MP, Alfred Arthur Kangam. He was already raising concerns like, hey, the budget totally ignores the economic gaps between the Imphal Valley and the hills, which, by the way, he was saying straight up, this is linked to the ethnic tensions. So this wasn't some random eruption. It's like textbook,
Yeah.
For anyone studying governance, and especially for those of you prepping for the UPSC, this is classic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that budget imbalance, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's key to understanding why this is happening. This isn't just, people clashing randomly. This comes from years of inequality. When a whole community feels like the system is against them, especially because of their ethnicity, that's when you get resentment, instability. It's like a recipe for conflict.
Okay, so let's get into what's happening on the ground right now. And the picture isn't pretty. The article talks about how aid distribution is a mess. Like, barely anything is reaching kooky areas, places like Kangpokpi, Churachandpur. And we're talking about, this is almost 3 years since things blew up on May 3rd.
It's almost like they're adding fuel to the fire, right? I mean, if you don't distribute aid fairly, it just makes the resentment worse and it deepens the divides. Like, how do you even begin to talk about peace when people feel so abandoned? We're talking homes, jobs, education, all gone. It's a whole mess of trauma. And the article really drives home that the government's response has lacked, that healing touch.
Yeah, the mental trauma. They're living in relief camps. And it's like their mental well-being is just an afterthought. For anyone listening who wants to understand how conflicts really works, this is so important. Ignoring the psychological impact is a recipe for disaster. You can't just rebuild buildings, you have to rebuild lives.
And that's where it gets interesting, because the article highlights this contrast, right? The government's all about restoring places of worship after imposing president's rule, which, okay, symbolic, but, and this is a big but, what about the homes? What about the Kukizo people who were driven out of the Imphal Valley? What about the Maitis and Churachandpur and more? Rebuilding lives means everyone has a place to live.
It's complex, no doubt about it. And the article makes sure to point out that there's suffering and, unfortunately, people doing the hurting on both sides.
Yep.
So any solution, any real lasting solution has to acknowledge everyone's pain and address their needs.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole security issue, which, let's be honest, is still really shaky.
Yeah.
Militants on both sides have looted weapons. And yeah, they've recovered some, but the article says a lot are still out there. That's not a recipe for peace.
Right. So when the government says, oh, things are back to normal, it feels a bit out of touch. Like, sure, rebuilding houses is a big task, but the article highlights something else too, something really practical, but so important. A lot of the displaced Kukizo people, they've lost their documents, like academic certificates, voter IDs, gone. How are they supposed to put their lives back together without those?
Yeah, that's a huge problem. Without those documents, it's almost impossible to get basic services. Forget about going back to school or even voting. They're basically stuck.
And there's this huge trust deficit. The article talks about how the Kukizo community, they don't trust the Manipur police because it's mostly Maite. And then there's the Assam Rifles who, well, let's just say there are questions about their neutrality. It doesn't paint a pretty picture of the security situation.
If you don't have trust, the government can't really function, right? How do you enforce the law? How do you keep things stable if nobody believes in the system? And for our listeners, think about it. This is fundamental stuff, especially for those of you aiming for the UPSC.
And then let's not forget the psychological scars, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about people, kids even, who've seen horrible things. Any solution, any lasting solution has to include addressing the trauma. Mental health support, that has to be a priority.
Totally. And on the governor's shoulders, Governor Ajay Bala, he's got quite a task ahead of him. So let's zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. The article talks about these deep-rooted systemic issues, and it all comes down to demographics and land, basically.
Right. History matters here.
Uh,
So you've got the Métis, a big chunk of the population, but they're mostly in the Imphal Valley. They can't own land in the hills. And then you got the hill communities. For them, land is everything. It's part of who they are. The article mentions how some of these policies come from the colonial era, but it's been decades since independence, and they still haven't found a solution that works for everyone.
And here's the thing, right? Modi keeps talking about the Northeast as Ashtalakshmi, like the 8 forms of wealth and prosperity. But then the article points out he hasn't even visited Manipur. The response has been slow. So it makes you wonder, does the rhetoric match a reality?
And that ties into a bigger policy point, right? The
No.
Act East policy. The idea was to boost the Northeast's economy. But somewhere along the line, it became more about countering China, which, okay, that's important, but the article suggests maybe they've lost sight of the Northeast itself.
And the region itself is a factor. Like, don't forget, the Northeast is right next to Myanmar and Bangladesh. Both have their own problems. That impacts everything. Security, moving across borders, development. It's all connected.
Yeah, and some key projects have stalled, like the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, the Caladan project. These were supposed to connect the region, boost trade. It just shows how complicated things are. Getting things done, especially in that region, is tough. And while things are a bit better within the Northeast, the article says traveling between states can still take forever. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do on infrastructure.
And to wrap it up, the Indian Express makes a really powerful point. Another parliament session has come and gone, and nobody really talked about the Northeast's problems. And for those of you studying for the UPSC, this is huge. When the country doesn't pay attention to these issues, that says a lot about how we govern and how we deal with regional development.
So as we look at all this, the article makes it really clear, right? This isn't just about one problem, it's all linked. The lack of aid, the slow rebuilding, the trust issues, the land disputes, and the lack of attention from the center. It's a whole web of interconnected challenges.
It's a classic case study, and for our listeners, especially those UPSC aspirants, this is gold. You're seeing governance, social justice, ethnic relations, and regional development all rolled into one.
So let's put it to you. If you had to pick one thing, one single step that could make the biggest difference in Manipur right now, what would it be and why? Think about it. What needs to happen first to start fixing this? And to really dive deep, make sure to check out the original article in the Indian Express. And if you found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We always want to hear what you think and explore these issues further.